Good morning. Thank you for that. I was standing in the back yesterday and I said, it's just weird, right? Watching this great conference. And this was my favorite conference when I was president. It's something that Trish and I put a lot of time and energy into it, and certainly a lot of money to make this conference the best aviation conference in the world. And we're so happy and proud to see it continue to grow. But yesterday was weird, kind of like I was having an out-of-body experience. Today is completely bizarre as I put on a suit and tie and come up on this stage. And thank you for that warm welcome. But it's just really nice to see everybody and get kind of past this pandemic, if we're past this pandemic. But let's get right to this panel because, you know, being first queued up on day 2 after a night in Vegas, or maybe a third night in Vegas, will be challenging, but we'll keep you engaged. First, I'd like to invite Todd Hauptli, President and CEO of AAAE, to the stage. Next, I would like to invite Linda Jojo, Executive Vice President, Chief Customer Officer of United Airlines. Brian Wynne, President and CEO of AUVSI. Peter Bunce, President and CEO of GAMA. And Linda Daschle, former Deputy Administrator and Policy Wonk of all of Washington, D.C. Good morning, and we had a great panel discussion right in the back, and we wish we should have taped it and just filmed it as we were just getting ready in the green room. I guess it's really important for us to give a little background of each other. So Todd, if you would just tell us a little bit about you and your organization.
Thanks, and Paul, thank you for doing this, and for NATCA for inviting me back again. Appreciate it. I'm Todd Hauptli. I'm the President and CEO of the American Association of Airport Executives, AAAE. We partner with NATCA on a lot of important meetings and conferences and a lot of initiatives in Washington. It's great to be out here again. It's a privilege to be invited back after a hiatus. It's been a number of years since this has been in person, and I'm thrilled to be here. We represent folks who run airports around the country, and they're part of the whole aviation ecosystem that you all play such a critical role in. So glad to be here.
Thank you, Todd. Linda Jojo.
Thank you. Well, my name is Linda Jojo. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Customer Officer at United Airlines. I'm responsible for the customer experience that people have when they fly, as well as all of the technology platforms that we use. And I guess we all know that the most important thing about the customer experience is getting to your destination on time and safely. And I just want to thank all of you on behalf of United Airlines for what an important role you play in ensuring that our customers get to their destinations safely. I'm looking forward to talking to the panel about this for the rest of the day.
Thank you, Linda. Brian?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Wynne. I'm President and CEO of the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. It's great to be back. I addressed this conference, I think, right after I started my tenure at AUVSI back in 2015. Things have changed a little bit since then in the world of uncrewed systems. In case you think that this is new technology, my organization is celebrating its 50th year. We started out when some guys that were experimenting with uncrewed systems in Vietnam were starting to have their programs cut at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and they stepped off base and created a private organization to carry on with the research, and here we are 50 years later, a very different organization, pardon me, but it's still very much a dual-use technology, of course, and our foundations tend to be more military, but of course, over time, there has become a huge demand pull for utilizing this technology for public safety, for many industrial purposes, for delivery, and so forth. So the organization has become very, very broad, and I'm really delighted. Most importantly, I'm coming up on my 30th anniversary as a pilot, and yeah, it's you guys that basically helped me not just cover up my mistakes, and thank you for being so forgiving all the time, but literally guide us home. Thank you. Thanks for being here. I'm glad to be here.
Brian. Pete?
Thanks, Paul. Pete Bunce. I run the General Aviation Manufacturers Association. As Brian, active pilot, cut my training wings with flying fighters in the Air Force. Spent a lot of time working on Capitol Hill, my last job in the Air Force, and been doing GAMA for 17 and a half years. For those of you not familiar with GAMA, we represent everything from Boeing business jets, Airbus corporate jets, down to this new area of advanced air mobility, especially the manned systems, air taxis, if you want to call it that, anything that's got an electric or hydrogen propulsion capability with it. Also large maintenance organizations around the globe. We've got offices in Brussels and in Washington, D.C. Very technically oriented staff. We work very closely with NATCA, and Rich and I just had a great lunch the other day where we were talking about a lot of things that we're going to be working on together, the interface between a lot of these new vehicles and systems that you all have to be able to safely integrate them into the airspace, and also the great technology that we're working with NASA to be able to have a safe system where we can know what's happening with the small UASs down at low altitude and the transition of manned aircraft and some of the autonomous aircraft that'll be transitioning up above 400 feet. So excited for the conversation, Paul.
Yeah, outstanding. Linda Daschle.
Good morning. Great to be here. I started with the FAA, wow, I guess 45 years ago at a flight service station in Manhattan, Kansas.
When you were 5?
When I was 5, yeah. Thank you, Paul. Came back to the FAA, well, I left the FAA and then went to the Civil Aeronautics Board, so I'm really dating myself. But had the honor of coming back to the FAA during the Clinton administration as their deputy administrator. And today I'm officially retired, except I get to serve on some amazing advisory boards like Aviation, who has created space-based ADSB, the National Air and Space Museum. And then with several of my colleagues, I'm also on the FAA Management Advisory Committee, and perhaps we'll talk a little bit about that. But I know on behalf of our fabulous, we call it MAC for short, our fabulous chair, Donna McLean, she would want us to say, again, thank you to Rich, to Andrew, to all of you for allowing us to be a part of this amazing conference, Paul. I want to congratulate Rich. He's fortunate to have such an incredible base to build upon, and this is probably my first opportunity in a public forum to thank you, Paul. You and Trish, I mean, you inspired us all. You became a voice that, yes, we need. We needed that voice even at times when it was difficult to hear what you were telling us. But I know from my own time, NATCA and all of the brothers and sisters and all of the aviation safety professionals associated with the FAA, you've made us proud. And particularly as we've come through this pandemic, you've taught us again that any test that is put to you, you seem to always not only meet it, but even exceed it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's not hard. Just you have great people.
I know. I just met
you
Adana.
empower them to do great work, and just stand back and take all the accolades, because this is the group that does the outstanding work day in and day out. So it's been it was an honor and a privilege. Bizarre to put a tie on. Retired people don't put ties on every day, believe it or not. But it's an honor to be here. Pete, we're going to roll right into this, and we'll talk about, because you're representing most of these cutting edge technologies, and you know, we see technology evolving so rapidly, but in our normal lives, but we do not see it equating to aviation. And between you and Brian on fabulous concepts coming on, how do we move from, as we meet the challenges for the future, how do we start to see, we heard yesterday there was a panel, and it was, well, 3 to 5 years is our normal way of bringing technology on. And, you know, with all due respect, 3 to 5 years they don't do it in 3 to 5 years because, and it's nobody's one fault, it's a structure. And I want to see, do you have an idea how to start navigating this to move forward?
Well, Paul, I think one of the challenges that we all have is trying to talk about advanced air mobility in something that makes sense to us all, because it's now become a term that encompasses almost anything new coming in there. So we're throwing challenges at the FAA right and left, you know, trying to just, and Brian, I'm sure will talk about this, beyond visual line of sight. How do we go beyond that when we know, as Brian had said earlier, we've had this technology out there, we know how to do it, but how do we integrate its safety? And that's the challenge that we're throwing at the FAA, and we're throwing, you know, there's more players in there. You know, my traditional membership are trying to get through certification programs and have the FAA keep pace with what they're doing, and now we've got all of this new technology we're throwing at them. But I think if we go back to the paradigm of our standard procurement process, as you said, we're just not going to get there. We're going to see then other nations start moving ahead, which is going to put congressional pressure on everyone, and maybe things happen that we don't want to have happen, such as balkanization of the airspace, that the airspace starts to be given to states or local municipalities, which could be very detrimental to everything that we do, or we sit there and we segregate the airspace, and we don't want that. So NASA has developed systems, the UTM system that they've developed to work the low altitude, below 400 feet, thousands of vehicles that Brian's organization is going to put in the airspace, that can be funded by private entities, by private industry. We've got to figure out a way then to be able to then hand the information when we have a larger vehicle that's transitioning above and below 400 feet, to be able to integrate, to be able to allow the technology to pass to these great people the ability to give call outs, to give warnings, to move the small UASs out of the way when we've got to do that transition. The other thing that I see also is a big challenge is right now, as we go into the crawl phase, and if we look at timelines that I know Acting Administrator Nolan is helping us with, to be able to get the new Advanced Air Mobility eVTOL, so now I'm putting an acronym afterwards, the vehicles that can have a vertical lift capability that we're going to certify under what's called powered lift, to get them into the airspace in a metropolitan environment. We know that there's not going to be radio connectivity. We're going to have to use cell phones to get departure clearances and that. We, though, have demonstrated a capability to be able to do this electronically, generating a strip and everything, and give them a launch clearance to be able to go get into the airspace, and then once we get them above 400 feet, we control them like traditional traffic. We'll be able to do that, and we know you can do it. You can do this better than any group on the planet, demonstrated each and every day. And if you just look at McCarran here, how many helicopter flights are going in and out every minute out of this airport here, we can do this. But we have to figure out a new way to bring UTM into this whole paradigm of control and work those issues.
Great. So Linda Daschle, 25 years, FAA reform. We're supposed to streamline the procurement requirement process to meet the challenges of the future. And Pete just talked about it. We have to figure out how to, streamline it. It's a structure problem. It's not an individual problem at the FAA. There might be some funding issues, but what does it look like? What does the landscape look like to actually streamline this process to meet the challenges?
So since you're making me the historian, let me just set the stage here. First of all, I hope Brad Mims is here because he takes or he deserves a lot of credit for some very historic legislation that occurred during the Clinton administration. And it was a Republican-controlled Congress, so that does give me hope that there still can be unity around some very pressing aviation issues. But yes, FAA became the first federal agency where we could wipe the slate clean for procurement as well as personnel. So think about this. At the time, 1995, we had 155,000 job descriptions for 50,000 employees. Didn't make sense. It took us forever to acquire new technology. In fact, Newt Gingrich, I remember, kept holding up our vacuum tubes, which we were buying from Poland, and we desperately needed them because of how old the technology was. So we got personnel and procurement reform. Wipe the slate clean. It didn't matter whether Congress had passed laws before, they no longer applied to the FAA, including anything within the executive branch. We also got a 5-year tenure for the FAA administrator, which to me was very important for the stability. Prior to that time, I think the FAA administrator tenure was probably 12 to 13 months. Very, very short time when you think about the decisions, the enormous decisions that need to be made. Also created this management advisory committee, which is, I guess, more or less a board of directors for the administrator. It's not subject to FOIA. The conversations are off the record. But it was really to have voices come into the administrator on a pretty frequent basis, and they represent, as so many of the people on this panel do, a broad segment of the industry, labor, DOD, and DOT. But as Paul mentioned, so 25 years has passed. It's an anniversary, actually, this year. Maybe we do need to kind of renew our focus on the flexibility that FAA was afforded. Perhaps with the new administrator, once he's confirmed, that can be one of his first things to say, okay, let's renew ourselves to figuring out, do we have the toolkit to really be able to do what Pete's members and Brian's members and Todd with his airports and Linda,
forget the commercial.
Yes, please get in here. The traditional operators, let alone all of these new entrants. Yesterday there was a panel, and my sense is that everyone, while they're not calling for a wholesale, change everything about the acquisition system, it did sound like there were some tweaks that were needed. But the one thing that we don't have is we don't have the financial stability that we had hoped that we could get. And I still think that that's a missing piece to all of this. Congress right now, they're faced with another CR. So the funding is unpredictable. Hopefully that'll work its way through. But yeah, 25 years.
25 years.
But I think we've got a little bit more work to do.
Yeah, and I think we have made advancements. I think just technology and the world is changing so quickly that we need to change so that obviously safety, paramount, but also meet the new challenges, right? Linda, softball, I promise. Airlines have been in the press a little bit. So has the secretary. I remember I was on many calls as we were going through the pandemic and as we thought we were coming out of the pandemic, that everyone said commercial aviation's not going to go back to normal until about 2024. And that, everyone's getting really used to being at home and Zooms and Teams and whatever other platforms that they're using. And so business aviation and or business groups are not going to be having big events like this. And here we are in 2022. On the controller side, we had to stop training because there's just no way to socially distance. Controllers are doing OJTI, and in the early days of the pandemic, nobody knew exactly how this was transmitted. We were spraying down consoles, and I still keep some of my boxes in Amazon, depending on where they're coming from, in my garage, and spray them with Lysol, but I have other issues. From an airline point of view and customer representative,
Yeah.
it's been a tough time.
Yeah, well, it has. Someone once told me a very wise thing, that there is no rearview mirror in the cockpit. We want to look forward, but you do have to look back a little bit. And no one knew how long the pandemic was going to last. I remember leaving the office in the middle of March thinking we were going to be gone for 2 weeks. And then obviously we all know that was much longer than that. And I think the good news is that travel came roaring back this summer. And you all know this, and we certainly feel it, that when people want to fly, we really wanted to try and fly them. So I would say in general, we were trying to meet the needs of the flying public that were buying tickets and buying tickets and buying tickets, and we would add a flight and they would buy more tickets. And we probably got a little out over our skis in terms of not just our infrastructure, but the infrastructure of the whole ecosystem being able to handle that. But it was done from the standpoint of people want to get back in the air. They want to come back to this type of an event. This is way better than whatever virtual event was held last year. And so we were trying to kind of work that. What I would say that happened specifically at United, I think in general it happened at the large carriers, but at United, we always knew things were going to come back. And so we were planning. We did actually work with our pilots to keep them current, but a lot retired and just said, I don't want to do this anymore. And so we've had to kind of work through that process. I also think that from a customer experience and from a technology perspective, we wanted to take advantage of the fact that we didn't have as many people flying to drive a lot of change. And so we've put in some very specific customer-facing tools in place that we built during the pandemic that we actually tried in airports that were mostly empty. It was a low-risk situation. We could try things. We started chipping away. We have old systems too. We've got, one of our core systems was implemented in 1968. Oh, wow. And so we've got some old things too, but we really took a hard look at trying to get after those to see if we could really make some change in a low-risk way. So we did try and do as much as we could in that period of time. I think going forward, I guess the good news is that we're still seeing people buying tickets. Conferences are coming back. Business travel is coming back differently. There are more conferences. People are going to more conferences. They're flying in from other smaller places back into their big cities like Chicago instead of starting in Chicago and flying out. And so you may start to see some of the patterns of the flying change as a result of that. But I think one thing we all know is that people are social and they would much rather be in person than be over Zoom. And so we sure feel like the industry is very healthy. And we're buying more airplanes too. And so we put an order in for 200 narrow bodies. We're really looking hard at some more wide bodies right now. We really think those are going to be growth aircraft. If for some reason we're wrong in our prediction, we'll retire some of the older aircraft. But it's not just the smaller, newer technology aircraft that are coming to play. The big players, we're here as well, and all the other big airlines are doing the same thing. So the top end is not going away.
Oh, absolutely. And 31 years in the FAA, I don't think I've ever seen a more severe weather season that we've experienced from April on. And I'm not going to get into the politics of global warming or whatever it means, but that plays such a role in,
yes.
in the delays and the cancellations. And
yeah, that's the other place that we've invested a lot of technology in using predictive analytics and predictive data to understand a little bit better. We're not weather forecasters, but understand a little bit better and try and do much more what we're calling pre-cancels, or letting customers have the opportunity to get out of the way of weather. And then what can we do with our dispatchers to help them make decisions about what to do? We've invested from a technology perspective there as well, because To think that last week's storm on the East Coast or this week's storm in the Midwest is a one-off event, you can't consider that anymore. You've got to kind of plan that to be normal.
Absolutely. So Todd, I'm stuck at the airport 4 hours.
Buy lots of things while you're there.
How do you make the passenger experience more comfortable, so to speak, more options? How do you meet the challenges of the future at the airport?
Great question. And working with our airline partners who have a vested interest in making sure that their customers are happy. And boy, if you've spent time in an airline lounge this summer, they've been crowded. You've probably had to wait in line to get in. If you're not in the lounge, like me, you're poking around looking for somewhere to squat and hang out for a while. If you're really lucky, you got a plug. So airports are looking at all kinds of things. Seating, what can you do with seating? What can airports do to bring back concessionaires? The concessionaires had a really rough go of it during the pandemic. Obviously, lots of places closed down. They had to shutter many of the concessions. Those are coming back, but I wouldn't say it's all the way back. Getting close, but that's a challenge. And making sure that passenger experience is as good as it can be as you're bringing back 90-95%, or in some cases, at some destination airports, you're up at 110, 115, 120% of 2019 numbers. It isn't always the case. There are some of the large gateway airports that focus on international traffic, specifically places like San Francisco or New York. They're still lagging because trips to China and places like that are still low. But at a lot of other spots, the activity levels are very, very high. Many of you in the audience know from your duty posts, the operations numbers are high at a lot of these facilities. And it's a challenge. It is a great challenge when I think back to the times when our airport leaders were bemoaning the fact that they had the cleanest, quietest airports that they had ever seen in 2020. We'll take a little managed chaos these days. It's a better deal.
Certainly challenges. So Brian, let's talk about some successes that we're seeing with your vehicles out there in your organization.
There's been quite a bit of advancement throughout this period where the rest of the aviation industry was kind of in dislocation, I would say, to use an economics term. Starting with the small UASs all the way on up, there's been I think a better recognition of where these fit in terms of the value that they provide to society. When we had to keep people apart from each other and we had to be able to deliver things in more remote places, some of the better examples of that are not necessarily in this country because of regulation, but there have been a lot of instances where things, the technology, uncrewed technology has been put to work, and we can kind of see the glimmer of what we've been talking about for a while in terms of really leveraging this technology to make the airspace more useful, and dare I use the term democratic. So it's, although I think we have a very democratic airspace system in the United States, because I sure use it a lot. So that's just in general terms. I think the community has felt increasingly recognized as doing something useful. At the same time, the technology has been advancing very, very rapidly. You've seen a lot of new entrants in this AAM space, what we used to call urban air mobility. Now we talk about regional air mobility, and so forth. And some, you can break it down into a couple different types of platforms or approaches to how you would move people or goods in a slightly larger format than what has gotten a lot of attention in small UASs.
Pete probably do a better job, classifying those things than I could, but I'm in the unique position of being able to root for everybody to be successful. Right. And right now we're in that realm of things that are, probably not everybody's going to be successful. There are a lot of whole different kinds of not only technological approaches, but business models that require tremendous amounts of partnerships, including local siting and how do you recharge things, et cetera, that are being figured out. And a lot of people moving out pretty smartly thinking they've got the right answer and where have we seen this before? But it's, it's creating some tremendous opportunities and no doubt some tremendous challenges in the aviation space. NASA has talked about we could be seeing as many as 500 million deliveries using small UAS by 2030 and 750 million moving people and goods in an inner city or an intra-urban area numbers of flights. Now that probably needs a lot of context, but to me what it speaks to that I would like us all to be thinking about is, and it was a little bit in the context of the earlier conversation, is automation. There's a tremendous need for automation, and that's something we shouldn't be scared of. It's just sort of, we're always on a continuum of automation. The question is, how do we integrate it into the way we're doing things now in a way that's not disruptive and that actually adds a lot of value. So I'm going to talk about one of the victories that's not it's not in the immediate past, but I think it's a great example, and it goes to something Linda Daschle was talking about, which is LANCE, which is low altitude advanced notification capability. I think I've got that right. I even looked it up right before I came up here, and that's why I've got my iPad, because this is for thinking, this is for remembering. And the LANCE is there was a recognition inside of the FAA. Hey, there are going to be all these drones. They're going to be flying all over the place. They're going to need to be cleared into this airspace, even below 400 feet. How are we going to do that? Well, we have to automate that. Right? There's no possible way that we can do that with people. And why in the world should we if we can automate it? But the key to the success of that was the FAA coming up with a legal structure that allowed for the agency to embrace outside partners and let them bring their technology to the table, and effectively set up a data exchange that allowed for industry and government to work together to automate that system so that it doesn't burden the existing system. Not to say, I don't know that necessarily supports 500 million into the future. There we're getting into UTM and beyond visual line of sight and so forth. So we're going to need to continue to progress along this continuum of automation. But I think we've got some good predicates. We've got some good examples of things that we can utilize and fall back on. We just probably need to move them along a little bit quicker.
Interesting. I would say the Jetsons age, but most of our controllers out there don't even know what the Jetsons is at this point, right? But that's the vision, right? You think and go, yeah, is this really what it's going to look like? Is that what it's going to look like, Pete? Well,
again, tomorrow we should have the first flight of an all-electric regional type of vehicle. Aviation up at Moses Lake, just north of here, is supposed to have their first flight. 8,000 pounds of batteries on a 9-passenger airplane. 8,000 pounds. Then, as battery technology improves and we get more energy density, we'll be able to extend those ranges. So we have the CTOL, conventional takeoff and landing aircraft, that are already operating out there. If you go up to Seattle, we've got Harbor Air using Beavers that have electric motor on the front of them, carrying a lot of batteries. We're automating caravans out there right now to be able to do fully autonomous caravan deliveries. So in the CTOL world, it's already happening and you're already seeing it. On the eVTOL, Advanced Air Mobility world, that's the Jetsons, those vehicles out there. You've got a demonstrator right out here in the hall. Joby's got theirs. They're probably going to be one of the first to market, but also in the vertical lift type of category, you've got the Leonardo 609 that should be certified very soon. So you're going to be seeing vertical takeoff with a conventional type of vehicle, except a tilt rotor capability. So this, again, as Brian said, is maturing so rapidly. So now if you focus down on the eVTOL portions and look at how they're going to operate, again, crawl, walk, run, there is no change in how anyone right now envisions they're in the crawl phase getting into the airspace. We're just going to need a clearance, they're going to fly, they're going to start to climb up. Ranges are relatively short, so you've got to think of a downtown city area with a vertiport to be able to go out to the suburbs. But also, there's a potential now, as we're thinking about essential air service, to be able to use these types of vehicles to start connecting. And now the challenge goes to Todd, how do we integrate with getting into airports, whether they're reliever airports or whether they're some of our hubs, and using that capability, because we can figure out how to get them very efficiently transported. We can avoid a lot of the long TSA lines and have them clear further out. So the potential is tremendous, and I think that's why you see so many, as Linda can attest, whether it's United, American, everyone is looking at this saying, this is a great multiplier for being able to move people out there. So there's a lot of excitement from the commercial industry to be able to see this fledgling industry of eVTOL and electric aviation move forward. And then also with the great efforts that like our Department of Energy is doing and looking at hydrogen fuel cells, because again, battery density is not where we need it to be today, but when we augment that with hydrogen fuel cells, that's a very clean energy source. It's something that people are getting excited about because it's a capability to be able to provide more power. And when you look at an electric motor and the efficiency you get out of an electric motor, and you're looking at a 10,000 hour time between overhaul compared to a 2,000 or 1,500 hour, your cost of operating starts to drop down tremendously. So the potential is vast.
The one, if I could just, well, one of my, I think one of the more thorny questions that's going to be facing the FAA, Congress, is, or how, or should these new entrants financially contribute to the FAA?
Now, I promised I was not going to talk about that, Brian.
Well,
you could talk about it all you want.
Look, I mean, when you look back over the past 25 years, I mean, with government shutdowns, with stop and gap funding, and not thinking that that's had an impact on the hiring, the training of our workforce, I mean, there are some financing challenges that will remain as long as FAA is a part of, you know, the federal budget system. But I think with all of these new entrants and with the upcoming, as we call it, the FAA reauthorization bill, which will expire in less than, I think, 13 months, there's an opportunity to look ahead at, again, FAA financing. Do they have the adequate resources? Because what I'm hearing right now is even within, you know, the facilities and equipment budget, there appears to be, you know, some challenges. So I do think, you know, with Pete and with Brian and others, and I'm not necessarily hearing that some of these operators are saying that they should not contribute towards the Aviation Trust Fund, which is such a vital part of, you know, financing FAA and what FAA needs to do to make sure that they can operate today's system, let alone tomorrow's. So I do think this financing question is something that obviously this administration is going to have to think carefully about. I don't think that this is necessarily a secret, but I do want to really commend Billy and the FAA team, Brad and Lawrence and others, and this administration for working on putting forth an FAA reauthorization proposal. Yeah. That was not done during the Trump administration, and it wasn't done during the Obama administration, which I thought was really unfortunate, Because Congress really needs to know what the FAA needs for the next 5 years as they look at reauthorization.
You're exactly right. And I think, you know, if the FAA isn't able or not willing to freely express the needs that they need, whether it's budgetary or whether it's reform, to meet the challenges of the future, then, you know, you're missing a great opportunity, because the Hill learns from the experts, as many of you have testified in front of Congress or have meetings on a regular basis. And FAA reauthorization is a wonderful opportunity to really make some lasting changes.
Yeah, like throwing commercial space. I mean, how much should Jeff Bezos be paying into the Aviation Trust Fund?
I have an idea, but you know, just and the funny thing, I'll give you some inside baseball. 2015 was the first time I met Brian. We were at a conference, and he introduced himself. And I think we were coming out of our, you know, third CR in 3 months. And, you know, I had hair then, I think, so I was pulling it all out, thinking, how in the world are we funding this place? And I said, and he's told me about it, and I said, well, how are you going to pay into the system? First, right out of the box. And that was one of the things I said, I'm not going to ask you that question. But there needs to be,
Brian.
there needs to be an understanding that the FAA resources are not unlimited, and the amount of energy that is spent on certifying these new entrants, or you know, giving the authority for these commercial flights, that's coming out of the Aviation Trust Fund. And you know, there should be a way, and I don't have an idea, so I'm not going to give one. And I promised Pete I wouldn't talk about another thing, you know. So, but at the end of the day, Todd, as we move towards traditional, away from traditional, you know, jet fuel, aviation fuel, where a lot of the general aviation end users are paying, the passengers pay the tax, but you know, there's a tax on the fuel. Now, are our airports equipped to deal with, you know, our electric vehicles and our hydrogen vehicles? Is there an equipage issue that we have to meet a challenge at an airport to meet the future?
I was thinking when Linda was talking about financing, it's boring, but it's critical, and that is the infrastructure necessary to support all these electric vehicles, low-emission vehicles, you know, a different composition of what you're going to see at airports. And a lot of these airports are old, and they're, you know, on grids that are old. And they definitely need to be more resilient, and they definitely need greater capacity. Pete, I would throw kudos to Pete, who started talking to me about this 24 months ago in preparation for this round of reauthorization. Last year, the FAA, I'm not picking on them, I'm just saying, last year the FAA gave airports $20 million. $20 million to deal with low-emission vehicles and to deal with electric vehicles. That's nothing. $20 million spread across 435 commercial service airports, set aside with anything at a general aviation airport, is nothing. So we definitely need greater focus and attention and solutions if we're going to figure out how to accommodate a new method going forward to get that last mile of service, to get in from some of these congested facilities out into the suburbs and just from point A to point B.
To Todd's point, you know, we're doing a lot of development of solar out in California and now in the Southwest. But one of the challenges we're seeing is that you develop solar, but then you've got the local utility gets the credit for doing the solar, and then they sell it back to the airport. And we're also, as I understand, Todd, doing some generating of power using natural gas on some of our airfields out there. That should be a source of revenue for the airport. I mean, if we sell gas, traditional petroleum, we sell electricity, but the airport, if they're generating power on the airfield, they should be able to sell it and monetize it. And I think that would also really help spur this along.
Yeah. It's one of the biggest challenges, because we could have the vehicles, but if you can't charge them or you can't get the proper fuel. So Linda, Jojo, I got two Lindas up here, so I have to say, Linda, Jojo. Commercial aviation gets hit over the head a lot for being the biggest contributor to global warming with the carbon emissions. And I know United is on the cutting edge, so to speak. Your CEO has been out there speaking. We're on the path to be zero carbon or carbon neutral.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about some new airplanes. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah. We are passionate about helping solve this problem of how to get to net zero emissions, and it comes to it in a couple of different parts. The first and by far the biggest is sustainable aviation fuel, and how do we help those entrepreneurs that are trying to figure out how to turn various different feedstocks into sustainable aviation fuel so that there's enough of it. We use all we can get. We have invested in various different technologies, and we have enough fuel now, I think, to fly regularly between San Francisco and LA, which is really not that much. And we can do that, and we've proven that you can do that with the conventional engines. And so we have been making various small investments, not picking winners, but trying to figure out what is going to be and there's various different chemical processes around algae and woody mass and all these other technologies that are to turn those masses into fuel. We're also really thrilled that there is some pieces of the infrastructure bill, much like solar and wind had some subsidization early on. There is some subsidization around sustainable aviation fuel, but it's better than nothing, but they didn't get it quite right. But we're looking at hoping that that's going to do that piece. The other is in the areas here around how can we help with other parts of how we can use technology. Those 8,000 pounds of batteries isn't going to be enough for a commercial air flight anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be part of that solution. And so we have invested in various companies that are doing the battery technology. We're looking at various eVTOL companies, and we've invested in a few there as well. Not so much this is going to replace the large jet anytime soon, but we feel like if we aren't really starting to think about how we can incorporate that into our business model, then it's going to take even longer. So we're trying to really stimulate that entrepreneurship, that innovation, to help make that happen.
Absolutely. Linda Daschle, I'm putting you on the spot here. We have an acting FAA administrator, an acting COO. We have many people in the line of business of the FAA in acting positions. As someone who's been behind the curtain of the FAA, does that handcuff the FAA from doing their job? Does it hinder?
Well, you look at, Billy and Tim and others who are serving in these acting positions, and I think, they are moving as aggressively forward as they can. There are these external parties, whether it be DOT, OMB, the Congress, that play a role here. Would I like to have seen someone follow Terry Bristol in being named? Terry, by the way, if you're out here, you're fabulous. But I'd like to have seen, I'm not privy to how early Terry informed the leadership of the FAA of her departure, but that is such a key position. If there's one thing that I want us all to remember is our own duty to remind any external party, whether it be DOT or OMB, the President or the Congress, how unique really the FAA is. And air traffic is the reason why it's so unique. Of federal agencies, when you think about their their workforce, usually it's like 5% that's involved in the direct operation of the industry they're regulating. We're like over 70 or 75%, and that's because of air traffic. So I guess getting back to where I was going is that it would have been great to have had Terry's replacement named almost immediately. That did surprise me, and still surprises me, but my sense is that the administration is close to naming someone, so that's good. And again, with the FAA administrator, I think I was as shocked as anyone with Steve Dixon's departure, and I just hope that Congress will, confirm the president's choice very quickly.
Yeah.
So I'm not, yeah. I served in an acting position as well, after I was deputy administrator. I'd like to think that I didn't hesitate to make those decisions, but I think for the agency, you need to have those permanent positions named.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, the individuals that are acting would certainly like to stay in that position, and they're doing the job. So, humans make mistakes, right? But you don't want to make any mistake in an acting position if, well, everybody's focus is on you, right? So it's, I think it does inhibit them from being on the, on the cutting edge and making these tough decisions, right? Yeah. So FAA reauthorization, Pete, you've been around this program a lot. There's been a lot of talk about FAA reauthorization already on the Hill as everybody's trying to, well, the committee was actually trying to get everybody's input by like July 1. I know I was sitting on the MAC at the time. The MAC has put in some recommendations. I thought they were all outstanding. What does it look like as an FAA reauthorization process as we're rolling into one more election, one more probably change of the guard in Congress? What does it look like there?
Well, I would say, Paul, that, and again, I've been doing this 17 and a half years, I have never seen our industry so united together on things that need to be done. Yeah. I don't see things that are separating us. Rich and I had conversations about what NATCA wants to do, and I think everyone here will be fully supportive of that. I don't see any seams, so I'm very encouraged by that. As Linda said, having the agency come forward with a proposal versus just throwing it to the wind to Congress, say, Congress, you tell us what to do. Say, no, this is what we need to do. We need to articulate, though, we can't forget about the appropriations process. To Linda's point, we need to know where the hurt is in the FAA budget. I understood it was briefed at the NAC last week about just the bill for cleaning facilities that had to come out. And I mean, it was a gigantic bill. And that affected programs. Well, we, industry, can help by understanding and have visibility of where the pain points are in the budget so we can go and do what we do is say, Congress, we need help. Here are the priorities. So we've got to first, I think, pay attention to the appropriations process right out of the gate with the next Congress as we all coalesce around looking at reauthorization. But, the primacy and federal preemption in the airspace, I think, has to be one of the core things because I think that is in danger right now. Yep. And you've got, you have an AAM caucus up on the Hill, you got a UAS caucus, you got the GA caucus, you got all those others. We as an industry need to be on the same sheet of music as we approach them and say, you Congress together need to work with the committees. One, we can't have a 4-year cycle of getting a reauthorization. They should be able to pass one quickly, and I think it'll help that we are all in this together as an entire civil aviation industry.
Yeah, it's truly important to stay focused on, as it gives the roadmap for the agency, right? And if you look back on the 2018 FAA reauthorization, there's still a lot of work. Obviously, we had the pandemic, and 2 years, maybe lost years, or there's a lot of things in the 2018 that have not been implemented, right? And Todd, one of them is remote towers, right? We're supposed to have 5 remote tower sites. We have 2 in this country. We're still working on getting more. Technology is not perfect. It's continuing to evolve, but other countries are able to pull off remote towers. London City has a robust program, Sandoval, and they're starting to implement them in other countries. What do you see the future of a remote tower at airports?
Great question. I think we will see more. I think there's a growing sense that that's something that we should have here in the United States. Not necessarily widespread, but certainly more than two.
Yeah.
Somebody else may want to jump in on this. I'm going to tag on to Pete's point on reauthorization. I agree that we are more united than usual. We're all American, but we're more united. I just had to say that for you. But it's not clear to me that this is going to be a big transformational. I think it's an opportunity. It's not at all clear to me that it will be taken by the United States Congress. Elections have consequences, and we're going to see what happens in November. That will have a big impact on the reauthorization process. Whether the Republicans, as it increasingly looks to be the case, control the House of Representatives is one big question. What happens in the Senate, whether the Democrats retain their very slim majority in the Senate, or if that flips. And if it flips, as much as we in aviation would like Congress to spend time thinking about FAA reauthorization, Republicans in the Senate are going to spend 2 years on subpoenas, oversight hearings, trying to trip up the Biden administration. And I think there's a real chance that unless we are very aggressive and vocal in aviation in talking about our needs and what needs to be accomplished, that we'll be, and if you'll pardon my French, pissing in the wind against all these other white noises that are happening out there. So it's really going to be important for all of us to figure out how we can lock arms together and speak with a single voice on Capitol Hill about the needs of aviation in this next go-round, because it is not at all clear to me that the outcome will be good.
What's airports' #1 thing they'd like to see in an FAA reauthorization bill?
Stable, predictable funding.
Nice.
For the system.
Yeah.
I lose my card if I don't, my airport card, if I don't talk about Linda's favorite subject, passenger facility charges. Airports believe that that is an important financing tool. That's not a position that is agreed upon throughout the system, but from an airport perspective, we think that's a way of helping to get to that stable, predictable funding. But more broadly, we can't have stops and starts on and off.
Yeah.
We can't have shutdowns. We have to have stable, predictable funding for the future.
Linda, what's United slant commercial aviation?
Yeah, well, you know, I think it's a similar piece. The stops and starts, some because of COVID. You know, we had to stop things because of COVID, but then it also delayed things to start back up again, and we've gotten behind, I think, are pretty important. You know, I want to get back to the automated tower question. I'm a technologist at heart. I have a computer science undergrad degree, and I love new technology, and I love innovation, and I love the mobile app. But I just think from a technology investment perspective, unless automating towers is somehow going to pull and fix some of the really core technology challenges that you all have and that the FAA has in general around managing our airspace, I would rather see those programs get funded to what they actually need to spend and then push and have that happen all the way through. You know, it doesn't matter. The volume is increasing, and yes, you know, more people is a way to manage volume, and that's happening as I've seen, but technology is going to be the way to do it efficiently and probably over time safely, and I think there's got to be more investment there.
Yeah, and sustaining the current structure.
That's what I'm saying.
Right? Sustaining the current structure is massive.
Yeah. So,
right? And then you have to look for the future.
So I would almost, I think if you had told me there was like 15 more towers planned, I'd almost say that sounds like a distraction to me from what really has to happen.
Yeah. Brian, what's your number one issue that you'd like to see in FAA reauthorization?
I think I've ducked your question about how we're paying for the airspace. I mean, in my job, I have to think in multi-decades. It's as simple as that. And I do look back, and I'm an economist by training, so, and a really weird person who loves economic history. What we're in right now is a circumstance where aviation is looking at potential funding from, well, say it this way, interest from all kinds of different economic interests that go to different places than we've kind of been before. Sure, moving people and goods, important. But the ability to use some of the aircraft that are now coming into the airspace, and UAS and AAM are not the only new entrants, right? We've got hypersonic, supersonic, hypersonic, we've got commercial space, et cetera, et cetera. All these new things that are coming in that represent potential new funding sources for what need to get done. And we need to figure out a way. I don't have a good answer, by the way.
No.
Sorry.
It's a great answer.
But it, you know, we have to figure out a way to harness this. I'm also a very frustrated electric vehicle driver. I've been saying for a long time that we have two national imperatives that are at odds with one another. One, to have a highway trust fund that will allow us to keep to catch our infrastructure back up with the needs that we have out there, and we all see that happening now. But you know, bridges getting ready to fall down in this country, and that's been predictable for a long time. Has been predicted for a long time. Meanwhile, I'm out there freeloading on the roads. Trust me, I can afford to pay my taxes, and I do. But you know, but it's just weird to me that we're promoting electric vehicles, and we think it's a good thing to use less and less carbon and less very energy-dense gasoline. But we're not going to tax that. You know, we have to figure out a way to capture the value that's being created. Otherwise, I'm using the infrastructure and I'm not paying for it. And I don't think that's fair. I just, you know, on record, I don't think that's fair. But I think too that if we're creative, we can figure out ways of leveraging things. And you know, last time I checked, the trust fund could get bigger. But you know, part of the biggest problem is the way we apply the trust fund. And if we look at it as, well, this much needs to go to GA, this much needs to go to airports, this much needs to go, and oh yeah, you guys over here, you know, you get what's left over. We're going to fall behind and not be competitive in the future. We're not going to leverage the tremendous opportunities or realize the tremendous opportunities I think we've got. So I didn't want to duck the question again.
I promise I wasn't asking the question. I was just curious what you wanted.
There are huge economic interests here that can be leveraged in this process going forward.
Yeah.
But what entity starts that conversation? Where is the right entity to get people? Because I think, again, there are a lot of parts of the industry that could get together and look at these new entrants and say, okay, how could they contribute to the trust fund? How are we going to transition as we use these new fuels and energy technology? But somebody's got to start the conversation and have it, and I'm at a loss to say who's going to.
It should be you.
But I think it should be the administration.
Yeah.
We were not successful in 1995 when we proposed certification fees, which is, you know, we totally respected where Congress was coming from. We did get overflight fees. I mean, here are aircraft that are flying over using the FAA air traffic services, never contributing, whether through a passenger tax or a fuel tax. We got that, but then unfortunately, Congress directed it towards another source to fund essential air service. So, but I do think, you know, this is the responsibility of the FAA, of DOT, of this administration to say, do we have a financing issue? How are we going to be able to handle all of these new entrants? Reauthorization gives us an opportunity to speak out on that. That's leadership. I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting flashed red. We have a lot of challenges in front of us, but it's nice to see such smart, brilliant people still in the mix of aviation to meet these challenges. And please thank this panel for giving us a broad view of what aviation looks like.